There will be a case scenario shared tonight that is based on common experiences that the sexual assault response team responds to in our community on a regular basis. The panel is going to walk through their roles as it relates to the scenario and how they might help the reporting person, as well as how some of the panel members may interact with the suspect in the case. The panel will not be able to address or answer specific actual case questions that are happening or have happened here in our community for the safety and confidentiality of victims involved in those cases. The panel will, however, address overall systematic responses and how cases evolve through the criminal justice system. If you do need further assistance or support, as this topic can be difficult to hear about, we do have an advocate who will be monitoring the question and answer chat. You will see at the bottom of the screen that there is a question and answer chat, and you would be able to send a private or anonymous question. Lane, who you will see here on the bottom, on my bottom right corner. I don't know if it's on your bottom right corner, but Lane will be an advocate, is an advocate here from the women's community, and will be available to monitor the question and answer chat. So we encourage folks to use that should they need to. Be sure to select private chat to the specific person you wish to speak to if you would like that to be private. Otherwise, it will go to everyone. If you wish to ask a question, you may do so in the regular chat, and that can happen throughout the duration of the presentation, but there will be a specific time at the end of the presentation for folks to ask questions during the chat. This is being recorded as we will be airing this or using this for future social media education. So I do want to make people aware of that. I want to spend a little bit of time talking briefly about why we're doing this tonight and what our SART team is all about. Give me one moment. So our SART team consists of, it's comprised of core members, typically including advocates, law enforcement, forensic medical examiners, prosecutors, sex offender agents, specialists, and can include other team members such as our team here in Marathon County, which includes victim witness and mental health providers, as well as the Child Advocacy Center forensic interviewers and advocates. The statewide SART protocol was developed in 2009 here in Wisconsin, and it was endorsed by the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Office of Justice Assistance, the Governor Attorney General's Office, and the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. So the reason we have a SART model is to further reduce trauma for victims of sexual assault, as well as commercial sexual exploitation as they are entering the criminal justice system. We also want to have it to be able to allow victims to walk through the criminal justice system as an ally, being able to work together to support victims. And we collaborate in a victim-centered way, emphasizing safety, quality assessments and investigations, and obviously assisting victims in the recovery process. So again, the team players of a SART tend to be community-based advocates, law enforcement, prosecution, forensic nurse examiners, Department of Corrections, mental health, victim witness, and child advocacy forensic interviewers as needed when we go over teen cases. So these are the SART members we are going to meet this evening. One of the other reasons we're holding this event tonight is because April is Sexual Assault Awareness and Child Abuse Prevention Month. We're excited to bring this event to our community, and we are delighted to have Mayor Katie Rosenberg join us tonight as the moderator. She will be leading us into our case scenario and introducing the panel. So we will be sharing a case scenario with you all. I'm going to share that on our screen for you to view in just a few minutes.
I'm thinking it's time for me to help introduce our panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I think it's really important that our community sees how we collaborate as different functions in our government. And I'm really excited. You have some amazing people who are on this team. So I'm excited to introduce them to you. So first off, we have Officer Benjamin Thuman. He's with the Wausau Police Department. Thanks for being here. We have Lynette Volkers, who's a forensic nurse at Marshfield Medical Center, Weston Hospital. We have Kimberly Pufall, who's a victim advocate at the women's community. I've known her for a while. She's an amazing human. Actually, all these people are amazing humans, so really lucky to have them working on our behalf in our community. Officer Sarah Bedish, the Victim Resource Unit with the Wausau Police Department. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's really important. Kristen Seidler, our mental health therapist for the Wausau Police Department. And Teresa Whetstone, our Marathon County District Attorney, obviously at the Marathon County District Attorney's Office. Thank you for, oh my gosh, you're still at work. It's a busy, busy time. Pam Stephan Carls, our Victim Witness Coordinator for Marathon County Victim Witnesses. Christy Zander, Probation Agent with the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. Teresa Schultz, who's a Registry Specialist with the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. And then I think I'm going to throw it back to Jessica, who's going to take us through this this scenario, so we can all kind of understand what goes into this SART program.
Yes, thank you so much, Mayor Rosenberg. So at this time, I'm going to read the case scenario that we're going to work off of this evening, and you can certainly read along as you like. So Sarah was excited about celebrating her 21st birthday, and she and her friends decided to go to dinner at a local restaurant, and after dinner went out for a few drinks at a local bar. When they got to the bar, there were several friends there, including her boyfriend. Sarah was being offered shots since it was her birthday, and she had quite a few. Shortly after she arrived, one of her boyfriend's friends, Eric, came over to her. He was quick to offer her another shot, and when she had finished, right after she had finished her first one. After about an hour and a half of being at the bar, Sarah was definitely feeling the effects of the shots and decided she better not have any more. It was getting late and Sarah wasn't feeling the best and wanted to go home. She and her friends all went back to her and her boyfriend's house. All of the friends except for her boyfriend's good friend, Eric, went home. Eric decided to spend the night on the couch. At some point in the evening, Sarah came out of her bedroom where her boyfriend was sleeping to get a drink of water, and Eric was awake on the couch in the living room. He got up and followed her into the kitchen. He told Sarah she didn't look well and should come and sit down on the couch. Soon he was telling her that he's always found her attractive and wanted to be here tonight to help her celebrate her birthday. At this point, she tried to get up and go back to her bedroom, but he grabbed her hand and asked her to sit with him for a while. He offered her a massage to help her feel better. Soon after, he reached over and kissed her. Soon, Eric's hands started moving from Sarah's face to her breasts, and she was trying to get off the couch, but Eric was too strong. Sarah fell off the couch trying to get away from him, and he climbed on top of her. Sarah was telling him no and repeatedly telling him she has a boyfriend and doesn't feel the same for him as he feels for her. The next thing Sarah remembers, Eric was having sex with her. The next morning, Sarah doesn't want to get out of bed. She's afraid to tell her boyfriend what happened. She tells her friend later that day, and her friend convinces her to call the police.
Well, I guess that's where we're kind of starting this discussion is with the police. I guess Officer, maybe you could kind of start us off with how you approach these.
Yeah, so just to start off, I'm a patrol officer with the City of Wausau Police Department. My role as a police officer, first and foremost, is to make the victim feel as comfortable as possible. So in this case, Sarah, the incident can be very awkward and difficult to speak about. So I just want to make sure that she feels as safe as possible and as comfortable as possible when speaking to me. In most cases, and in this example, the victim is a female. In some cases, it's a male. So if the victim feels uncomfortable speaking to a male officer and a female officer is available, we can make that happen. And once again, ultimately, our job is to assist the victim and do our part to help the victim and make sure that he or she is a survivor of sexual assault. From there, to assist in making the victim feel more comfortable, we can conduct an interview at their residence, at a friend's residence, or at the police department, wherever they feel most safe. And it's not uncommon during our investigation to have a family member, a friend, an advocate, someone present with them to support them during the interview. We found that is pretty important to have with them, that support along the way. In some cases, reporting sexual assault, it can be extremely difficult for numerous reasons. The victim may be hesitant to report the incident because the perpetrator is a close friend to them, a family member, a spouse, boyfriend or girlfriend. In the case of this scenario, it's her boyfriend's best friend, or one of his good friends. So he or she might be hesitant to report the incident. With that being said, the victim can report the incident, excuse me, when they are ready to do so. So it's really when they're comfortable with it. As far as in regards to preserving evidence, though, it's recommended to report the incident as soon as possible. That way we can collect any physical evidence and speak to any witnesses when their memory is fresh. If the assault occurred within a 5-day period of reporting it, we prefer the victim have a sexual assault exam done at one of our local hospitals, and an officer like myself or whoever you happen to speak to can assist with arranging that. While in conducting our investigation, it's common for an officer to take photographs of the scene. They might collect any sort of digital evidence, and what I mean by that is text messages, Facebook messages, any sort of social media content. That's evidence for us to collect, and we can work on that for you. And we also look at interviewing any potential witnesses, someone that might have any information or might want to speak to us about the incident. After collecting the evidence, we are speaking to potential witnesses with any of that information that they might be able to provide. And then we would conduct an interview with the suspect. That interview would preferably be on a voluntary basis with cooperation, and ultimately we want their side of the story. And if probable cause exists that the suspect committed the crime, that suspect is arrested and taken to jail. And then after collecting evidence, speaking to the witnesses, the suspect, assisting the victim throughout the process, it's our job to document all aspects of the investigation and interviews. And what I mean by that is that the officer would document the facts, what had happened, the statements. There's no bias, there's no opinion within that officer's report. We're just documenting it as we haven't done our investigation. So if the victim for some reason does not want to report the sexual assault or is not willing to at that time, that's okay. At the very least, we want to make sure that they can get set up with some sort of victim resource services, some counseling to manage some of the mental trauma that could be as a result of the incident. Whether the victim knows it or not, it can affect their life negatively. And fortunately, we are very fortunate to have so many resources within our area, like the Women's Community and the Victim Resource Unit, which we'll talk about later.
One of the things you mentioned was having people get that sexual assault test kit taken. So maybe we can move on to Lynette Volkers, and you can explain a little bit about what that entails.
Absolutely. So I am a nurse by background, and sometimes you'll hear forensic nurse and SANE. SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. What that means is I have additional education and training in forensic examination and evidence collection for our victims of sexual assault. Now, When, in this case, Sarah gets to the emergency room, my first priority is to make sure she's okay, to assess her, to make sure she doesn't have any medical emergency that needs treatment immediately. Next, we go through a rather extensive chart. This is my paper chart. It's 20 pages where I will question her, ask her a lot of questions, let her tell me what happened. Based on what she tells me and the answers to those questions, that helps direct a treatment plan. There are certain possible medical issues that can occur from a sexual assault, like sexually transmitted disease or infections, pregnancy, and HIV. So depending on the plan that we develop, we can give medications for those. Lastly, we will also collect evidence. In Sarah's case, her body's the crime scene. So like Officer Thuman was saying, we want to have her come to the emergency room as soon as possible so we could potentially capture the suspect's DNA. We will photograph, kind of like you see in those crime shows. We will get the camera out, we will photograph, we will swab. And after all that after that evidence is collected, we kind of seal it up in a kit, and then I would give the officer a call back to say, I'm ready for you to come get the kit. We'll have a discussion. Something people don't understand about trauma is Sarah may tell the officer one thing and me another thing, and that's completely normal because that is her response to trauma. So I might be able to give Officer Thuman a little bit of suggestions, like you might want to check out the couch, where she might not have even mentioned that to him. So, and then pretty much my role with Sarah is done at this point. But it is also important for when that victim comes to know that these exams are not in and out. It can average between 2 to 6 hours, depending on the severity of the assault. And also, if they take Eric into custody, we can also do the suspect exam in addition.
Thank you for that information. You talked about trauma, so I know that we have some advocates on to talk a little bit about their role. Kimberly Pufall from the women's community, maybe you could talk a little bit how you work with victims after they've gone through this, this first kind of all of it, actually.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Kimberly. I am, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm a victim advocate in our sexual assault victim services program at the women's community. And yes, so what is an advocate? Basically, I'm a professional support person. So my entire job is literally to support Sarah through this entire process. So Officer Thuman had mentioned I could be involved at that point. If she's giving her report at the police department, I could be called in there to support her during that process. If for some reason that doesn't happen first, or I'm not involved with the report at the police department, then as Lynette stated, when Sarah is there for that SANE exam, we as a matter of policy are called, an advocate will be with someone during that exam. Just like Lynette said, that is a very time consuming and invasive process, definitely a very personal thing. And my entire job is to support Sarah however she needs support through that process. And I can tell you this is going on my 7th year of advocacy. I have had, I've done all manner of things to support victims during those SANE exams. So whether that means that I'm there to hold your hand literally, or I'm there to kind of distract you and, talk about the weather and crack jokes, whatever is needed in that moment. And there's truly, every person has their own response. So it's everything in between. But Sarah gets to decide this at that SANE exam. I am going to be there to support her, but if she decides that she doesn't want me in that room, I will wait in the waiting room. If she decides that she doesn't want me to be there at all, she gets to call those shots and make those decisions. So my entire job is to support her through this entire process. So as you'll continue to hear the folks on the rest of our SART team, I'm going to, and I'm able to be involved at every step of the way through this with Sarah. This is obviously a very overwhelming situation. It is extremely traumatic to have had to experience sexual assault in the first place, and to navigate these systems is something that most folks gratefully don't have to have that experience. They don't know what it looks like to have to go get a SANE exam. So I'm going to be able to explain, as someone who's been at many SANE exams throughout my career, I can explain to Sarah the process, what's going to happen next. I'm going to safety plan with Sarah right after that SANE exam to make sure she has a safe place to go that night. I'm going to check in with her the next day. But again, she gets to decide if she is, not comfortable. I'm never going to pester anyone, and meeting with me is never mandated, but she gets to decide that she can have someone as a support. And I'll say definitely the experience of sexual assault is something that this event is so amazing tonight because we still don't talk about sexual assault a lot in our society and in our communities. So I will always reference the very first week that I was on call many years ago when I started as an advocate. One of my very first sexual assault SANE response calls, that victim was probably in her late 20s and didn't have anyone else at that experience with her. And even though she had just met me that night, she said she was so grateful for that support that she wasn't going to share it with anyone else close to her in her life that had happened. So I always kind of describe to people as an advocate, I mean, it's an incredible honor for me to be able to be a support for folks going through this experience. And I get to be with them the whole time. So like I mentioned, you'll hear from the rest of our SART folks. I get to support Sarah as she's made this report, as this goes through the criminal justice system. I get to be there to hold her hand figuratively or literally, help her navigate this. As things go on with court proceedings and court hearings, you'll certainly hear more in just a moment. If that's something that Sarah's not really comfortable following herself or being present at, I can do that on her behalf. I can follow and track the case and give her updates. She truly gets to decide how much involvement she wants with me, but I will always be here as a person to support her. Something else about sexual assault that even though we don't tend to talk a lot about it as a society, we're very familiar with victim blaming. So I like to describe too, so as you'll hear from our mental health professional, I am not a licensed certified counselor. That is not my role. But I like to say that I'm a little bit of an in-betweener. So I always absolutely advocate for folks to seek out a licensed mental health professional. I often refer to Kristen, who you'll hear from, but I get to be that in-between person that I'm always going to be there to listen. I'm going to be there to answer questions for Sarah. I'm also going to be there to make sure she knows she's not alone and that this wasn't her fault. So I'm always that person for someone to remind them, you are not at fault in this situation. But I get to be there throughout the whole process. And I know you're going to hear from the rest of our folks as to what that process really looks like.
Thank you, Kimberly. So when we're talking about the process, we have Officer Bedish, who has a really special role in our police department. Maybe you can just kind of talk through how you encounter these situations and what you do.
Sure. So like she said, I'm Officer Bedish with the Wausau Police Department. My current role is I'm the Victim Resource Officer. So my primary duty is to follow up with victims. I'm kind of an in-betweener myself. I have a law enforcement role, obviously, but I help with advocacy as well and making sure victims are connected with the necessary resources. So I work normal people hours, which is 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. I've been there where I worked the night shift and all that good stuff. So normal people hours. So primarily I'm going to be following up with a victim. In this case, Sarah, I would probably follow up with her the following day. If it happened on the weekend, I would follow up with her on a Monday. And sometimes the question comes up, why is another cop calling me? I've already talked to another cop. Well, my primary job is to make sure that her questions are answered. And to do additional investigative work. Sometimes if cases come in the middle of the night, officers don't always have a lot of time to check all of the boxes. So my job is to make sure all the boxes are checked for the DA's office so that there's not a lot of follow-up, so we don't have to continue to hound a victim for additional information. So in this case, I might follow up with her and ask if there's any more injuries that maybe need to be documented with photography, ask if anything else hurts, or if she remembered anything else. When a victim goes through something very traumatic, sometimes their recollection of events isn't very clear, and sometimes they forget details. Think of it as like having a nightmare. You wake up and you swear you're going to remember everything, and then you suddenly can't when you have to tell somebody. But then maybe the next day you start to remember little bits and pieces of it, and that's okay. That's why I'm here. I'm here to listen to your story and to kind of put those pieces together. So I might re-interview her or might ask her if she remembers anything else or any other details from that night. Another thing that I might do in this case is if, like Officer Thuman said, if digital evidence was collected like phones, if we collected the suspect's phone, or if the victim in this case agreed to have us look at her phone, I would go through that information just for text messages or any social media accounts where any evidence might be there, as far as conversations, maybe some where the offender was admitting to doing it, or pictures, anything that can collaborate what we collected from the victim, offender, and witnesses. So I might go through that type of thing. But on the other side, I get to hold the victim's hand too. So I'm going to make sure that she's connected with Kristen, our mental health therapist here at the PD. I'm going to make sure that she's going to make it to all of her appointments. A lot of individuals don't have a means of transportation. They don't know how to take a city bus or don't have the financial ability to get to places. And maybe they're too afraid to ask for help. So I'm here. I can help victims get to appointments. I can facilitate that. We can pay for taxis. We can help with bus fare. So I would help her with that. I would also make sure that she is connected with an advocate from the women's community. Sometimes that step gets missed in the process of connecting a victim to the hospital. Sometimes an advocate can't make it. So I would absolutely make sure that she is connected with somebody at the women's community. And if they're unfamiliar what a advocate's role is, I explain that. I encourage them to connect with somebody. And then on top of that, I ask them, what else do you need? What else can I help with? In certain cases, victims might be put out and not have housing anymore. If she's having maybe now problems with her boyfriend because of this situation, I can help her navigate that. So my position is partly funded through VOCA, which is the Victim of Crimes Act. So we have a lot of funding that I can utilize and to assist victims. So I can help pay for transportation, I can help with housing, I can help with rental assistance, utilities, food, groceries, phones. If we had to take her phone for whatever reason, we could facilitate getting her a new one in the meantime. The thinking outside the box is my go-to in these situations. I can pretty much utilize whatever I need to utilize to make that victim feel comfortable in this case. And sometimes just meeting with them and talking things through helps. It also helps to talk to an officer that's not in uniform. So other things that I might do is connect her with our crime response specialist, who isn't on this panel tonight, but our crime response specialist is not an officer, but she can also walk her through certain things too. So if we have to help her apply for crime victim compensation, we can help her do that. We will make sure that she's connected with victim witness from the district attorney's office and explain the purpose of victim witness, and keep her up to date with the cases. Court proceedings can be very overwhelming for individuals who have never been involved in court proceedings. I've been doing this job for 10 years and I still don't understand the ins and outs of court proceedings. But so we try to help victims with that and kind of help them understand what is next, what is expected of me. I also try to explain to them how it works on our end as police officers. Yes, we did the report was submitted, but what's next? What comes next? It's not like TV where things are done and over with in 50 minutes. So I help explain that to her. So like I said, there might be more investigations. I might do some more follow-up. I might go out and do some more interviews with witnesses as well if officers can't get to that. If she wants to file a restraining order against this offender, I can help with that. And also Kimberly from the women's community can help with that as well. So there's a lot of resources that we can offer. It's just a matter of what does that victim need and how can I help her get to those resources. So I'm not in between. I can answer stuff on the cop side of things, but I can also answer stuff on the advocacy side of things. And it's a really nice bridge to bridge that gap there to make sure that victim is really taken care of from all aspects. And then she, at least in this case, she would have a go-to. So if Officer Thuman wasn't available, I would be available. The other thing, if these cases come in during the day, I can go instead of taking patrol off the road. So I would have assisted Sarah. I would have gone with her to the hospital if she needed me to. I could have done the interview with her right then and there, so that we wouldn't have to do it later. The opportunity to kind of navigate around a victim altogether to prevent her from having to tell her story repeatedly is the end goal. So if I can do things from start to finish, that's great. Or if we can have one patrol officer and then pass it on to me, that's even better, because that's less traumatic than for that victim. So our unit can do a lot. We can do a lot for victims, and that's the goal, just to make sure that all of their questions are answered and that they're taken care of. So then I would refer her to wherever she needs to go. And sometimes that's the last time I would talk to her, and sometimes we don't stop talking to them until the case is closed. And sometimes we continue talking to them afterwards. So, but that's my job.
Thank you so much, Officer Bedish. I always think of you as the kind of person that just gets stuff done, and you have all the tools, so thank you. Also in our police department, we have a mental health therapist, Kristen Seidler. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you interact with victims, and what your main role is.
Yes, and I apologize. My screen seems to be locking up nonstop. So you don't have to look at my weird frozen face. I hope you guys can see. I just put up my contact information. So like I said, I hope that you can see that.
We can see that. Thank you.
Perfect. So I have been with the Wausau PD for about 4 years now. I started in March of 2017. And so my job really would be to work with Sarah, and kind of help her through this whole process, through like the criminal investigation, court proceedings, and beyond that, if she would like. So a lot of the time, Sarah would refer her to me after speaking with her. I also get referrals from Kimberly, as she said. So I may get it from her, or even if she might not have been like, sure if she wanted to meet with me or do any counseling right after the incident, but maybe later on she did. A lot of times, like Pam or somebody from the DA's office who will be speaking later on, they might refer her to me. And my job really, like I said, is just to help her through with a lot of the different things that people usually experience after something really bad happens to them. So for instance, especially since Eric was her boyfriend's good or best friend, there's a lot of guilt that usually goes on, thinking that maybe she could have done something differently, or it like in some way that was her fault. And so helping her kind of process through a lot of those things. And a lot of times Sarah's going to be getting a lot of flack from people, because usually Eric's going to not admit that he assaulted her, forced himself on her. And a lot of times, they say other things happened, or that, she was a willing participant, so then, different names get thrown around and people start spreading rumors and saying all these things and, calling her a slut and whatever else. And so, there's a lot of stress and different things that go on with that. A lot of times after a sexual assault or just something traumatic in general happens, people feel really on edge. They're very jumpy. They don't feel safe. They're constantly looking around for different things. They have a lot of trust issues. A lot of times people have trouble sleeping, and maybe they have bad dreams about what happened, or just bad dreams in general. Things might come up that remind them of it, like certain smells, or if there was like a song playing in the background, or like maybe the TV was on when this happened, and certain things might remind her of that. And then she kind of feels like it's happening all over again. And so I would really try and help Sarah to manage some of those things that she's dealing with. So going through different techniques on how to help her when she does start getting really anxious or stressed out. Ways to like kind of calm her brain down, and different things like that. A lot of times people end up feeling really depressed about this too. Like in the scenario, she really didn't want to get out of bed, and that is super common. Or she might be having different memory issues. Some of that might be because she was intoxicated, but a lot of times people just in general, after something really bad happens, they have trouble remembering. And that's a very common thing that happens because of all the different things that are going on with the brain when something traumatic happens. And so she might be remembering different things at different times, or remembering things in like random orders, which for a lot of people who haven't been through something like that, they automatically think that maybe she's making it up or she's not telling the truth, when really that's just what our brains do when something really bad happens to us. So again, I would just be helping her through all of those things. There's different techniques that we can do. Otherwise, for some people, just talking really helps. Just to have somebody where they can just kind of vent about their day, help them kind of normalize those things, because a lot of times people feel like they're going crazy after something like this happens, because they're not used to feeling this way. And one minute they're feeling all right, and then all of a sudden they just feel awful. And it's like, a really huge deal to even be able to like get out of bed and tie their shoes in the morning, like it's kind of like they feel like, Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. And so really just going through those things and kind of helping her through that. She can meet with me either at my office, which is at the police department. I'm downstairs at the police department. So if she would feel comfortable meeting with me there, we could do that. Otherwise, I also meet with people over at the women's community if they feel more comfortable doing that, or we can find a different place as well. I've met with people over at NTC before, Sarah's 21. It maybe if she goes to school over there, it's more convenient for us to reserve a room there where we can meet privately. I really try and work with the person to see whatever, feels most comfortable for them. And for some people, they just want to meet a few times and then see how stuff goes. I have some people who I just text. I have a work cell phone that you can see up there. A lot of times I'll text with people just to kind of check in until they're ready to come in, or if they're feeling all right and they have work and different things going on. So we just do that. It really is pretty up to the person. I have some people that I see super regularly, and I have other people who I don't. Maybe it's just like monthly or every few months, and then we just kind of do check-ins in between. I've had some people who we've seen each other pretty regularly, and then, due to different things, we stop seeing each other. And then, if they're having another hard time, they call me. And we can start seeing each other again. So it really is just dependent on what they're going through, because there's a lot of ups and downs throughout this whole process. And like Sarah said, it can take a while. And so especially depending on what happens later on with the court proceedings, a lot of times people might need, again, to like come in and see me, just kind of talk through stuff. And so, I will just kind of work with her with whatever she needs. And if it's something that maybe I can't provide, like for instance, I've referred people over to some groups because I thought maybe that would be really helpful. I can help her find whatever is going to be the best fit for her. So.
Thank you very much. So I guess we're moving on to the kind of court proceedings, and we're moving to our district attorney, Teresa Whetstone, who's really made a career in pursuit of justice for victims. Maybe you could help us understand the whole court proceedings and process.
Thank you. I'm Teresa Whetstone. I'm the district attorney for Marathon County. I've been prosecuting cases for Marathon County for over 19 years. Prior to becoming district attorney in 2016, I really focused on sexual assault prosecutions for the majority of my career. So I'm very familiar with the process, and I really appreciate this group. We're very fortunate in Marathon County to have the group that we have and the collaboration that we have amongst all those individuals who have different roles and contacts with victims throughout this process. We have 12 prosecutors in the DA's office, and we work for the state of Wisconsin, but we prosecute crimes for Marathon County. So all the crimes that occur in Marathon County that are investigated by the law enforcement officers in this county are referred to the district attorney's office to review for official charges. So the officers will arrest or book in an individual on a particular crime, and you might hear about that on the news, that an individual was booked in on a crime or arrested for a crime or referred for a crime. But it's our 12 prosecutors that actually review the police reports and determine what the official charges will be. a lot of times we hear that a victim is pressing charges. That is not true. It is actually the prosecutor who is bringing forth the charges. That's not to say that we don't take into consideration how a victim is feeling about the charging decision, and that is where this collaboration really assists us with the support of the women's community or the police department or the mental health professionals. They can be with a victim and assist them in supporting them in talking with our victim witness staff or our prosecutors directly about how they feel about the case going forward. So ultimately, our prosecutors are concerned with the safety of the victim, justice for the victim, public safety, and overarching all of that is we have to have enough to be able to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's very difficult at times as a prosecutor because we read the police report, we see the emotional impact of these crimes on victims, and yet our decision must come down to, can we prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt? There are all different levels of sexual assault, and you'll hear degrees associated with charges of sexual assault. There's a difference between sexual assault of a child, for simplicity, we'll say under the age of 18, and then sexual assault charges related to adults. So there are 4 basic degrees, first degree being the most severe as far as penalty is concerned, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree. A little basic information is that a first and a second degree sexual assault may have with that sexual intercourse or contact. Sexual contact can be over or under the clothing of an intimate part. So a lot of people don't realize that a buttocks, a breast, those are intimate parts that can be the basis for a charge of related to sexual contact. I guess I also want to make sure that I get across what without consent means. So when a woman or a man or anyone is walking around, the presumption is that they do not want to have sex with anyone. And that is where we start. And that's really important because there's no requirement that the person say no. There's a requirement that the person say yes to the sexual contact. So there's this myth out there that a person, if they didn't utter the word no during the sexual assault, then therefore it's not a sexual assault. Actually, the way it actually is in law is that the person is presumed to not want to have sexual contact and must freely agree and give their consent, if that makes sense. So I think that's really important to understand because I think a lot of people, going back to what Officer Bedish said, is that people feel a sort of a guilt. Maybe I should have done, I didn't say no loud, or maybe they didn't hear me. And the reality is the definition of consent under the law is different than that. So I'm going to just share my screen so you can kind of visually see it. So did not consent means that the victim did not freely agree to have sexual contact. Again, we talked about contact or intercourse with the person. And in deciding whether the victim did not consent, you should consider what the victim said and did, along with all the other facts and circumstances. It does not require that the victim put themselves in harm's way, that they resist or push or shove or scream or, first of all, that's not realistic when someone's in a situation of trauma. And we many times hear victims say that they couldn't even believe it was happening. Even after it happened, they couldn't even process what just happened. And anybody who's been through any kind of traumatic experience can relate to that, whether it's a a car accident or witnessing something. So there is absolutely no requirement that they resist. And this, I think, is really important too. If the jury finds that the victim did not, in fact, consent, it is not a defense that the defendant believed there was consent. So there should not even be a question asked of the defendant, like in a trial situation, what did you think? Now he can talk about, well, I observed this, or she did this, or whatever action, but it's not about his belief. It's whether or not the victim actually freely agreed or consented. So I just think that's really important for people to understand. I don't want to get into the legal, I could talk for hours about this, but I don't want to get into too much of that. But just to give an idea, third-degree sexual assault is the defendant had sexual intercourse with the victim. I don't even like that, how that's worded, but the defendant sexually assaulted the victim, and the victim did not give consent. So it's not that the defendant intended to have sex with her without her consent. The defendant's intent is to have sexual intercourse, and the victim did not freely agree or consent. In this particular scenario that we have, it's second-degree sexual assault because the defendant had sexual contact, touching the breasts of Sarah after he had grabbed her hand and when she was trying to get up from the couch. And then she is trying to leave the couch and she's unable to leave. And then she did not consent. She actually verbally expressed that, but again, she wouldn't have had to meet that element. And the defendant had sexual contact or intercourse by use or threat of force or violence, and that may occur before or part of the sexual assault. So there also could be use or threat of force or violence on one date can carry over to another date. So if you have a domestic violence scenario, for example, and I know Officer Bedish could talk about that, where you have a situation where someone's experiencing domestic violence or violence in the relationship, and then under that sort of continuing threat of the violence, there is sexual assault, sex without consent. So I think it's just very important to understand, as prosecutors, we are not going to be expecting that a victim said no. We're not going to be expecting physical resistance, that we look at the law and we understand victim dynamics. I feel like I get educated every day by people on this presentation about new dynamics, and we try to keep that in mind at all times when we're looking at what we can prove by way of charges. Just so people feel that they're alone, we have about 60 plus cases a year that we charge of adult sexual assault. There's 52 weeks in a year, so we're charging at least one of those. That's not all the child sexual assault cases or that type of crime. So there are a lot of cases, which unfortunately then leads to that amongst all the other cases that we have in Marathon County does mean that these cases take time. It is very difficult for victims to go through the court process. We do understand that that's why this group is so important, and community education about the support and resources is so important. We try very hard to keep victims apprised of what's going on in their case. Pam Steffen-Carls, who's going to be speaking next, will talk a little bit about the continual support that she provides in answering questions for victims. And one of the things that I think is very rewarding as a prosecutor throughout this process is, very few cases actually go to trial. But we've had victims throughout the years who, regardless of the outcome of the case, I don't think that I've had a case where I've felt justice was truly served. You always kind of have that sort of like, oh, you're never going to make the victim whole again. It's never going to bring things back to the way they were. But victims have said that they feel heard and they feel supported, And regardless of the outcome of the process, they feel that they've done everything they can to get their voice back, and that the system has supported them in doing that. And I think that's what we all try to do on this call. So the other thing I want to say is that even if Sarah had chosen to wait to report, that there is a very long statute of limitations for second-degree sexual assault. Even on a misdemeanor sexual contact without consent, it's 3 years. So it's not too late to report if you have been the victim of sexual assault and still have a consequence. It's also very important because if this individual does it to someone else and we can't, maybe the statute of limitations, the time frame has run for us to charge it, we may be able to use that information if, God forbid, that individual would ever do this to someone else. So the reporting is very important for us in the criminal justice system to have that information available and supporting other victims. And I better stop talking. Like I said, I could talk forever and turn it over to Katie.
Yeah, thank you so much. Your passion for helping people really shows through. So thank you so much for this work. We're moving to Pam Stefan Carls now, who's our victim witness coordinator. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you interact with the victim and also the court system, and how your role is comprised.
All right. So once the cases are reviewed by an attorney in our office, such as Teresa just described, when that decision is made to file charges, the victim witness program becomes involved with the victims. We're notified and we reach out to the victims to provide them information. They all receive a packet of information from our office with their rights as a victim, the services that are available. In many cases, if the offender is arrested and is in jail and has an upcoming court date that is fairly quick, we will reach out by telephone before that initial appearance to discuss what will happen in court, answer their questions, listen to concerns that they may have about what will happen in court, and inform them of their right to be heard at hearings. Victims do have the right to have input into the bond, as well as be considered as part of scheduling of hearings in the court process. Throughout the case, the victim witness specialist assigned will be the victim's primary point of contact. We work closely with the attorneys to ensure victims' questions are answered, that they have information about the court hearings and the case status if they choose to be involved. If the time comes that a case goes to trial, we work with the victims to help them understand what it will look like if they have to testify, working again closely with the attorneys as well as the other services like the women's community advocates to provide support. Once the case is concluded, whether that's a trial or if there's another resolution such as a plea agreement, the victim witness staff will provide information about the outcome. They answer questions about what services are now available once the case is closed and provide the contact information. From start to finish of the criminal case, the victim witness program's goal is to be there for the victim, provide as much or as little information as they want about the case. Again, this may change as they go throughout the process. As Kimberly described, there may be some victims who just become overwhelmed or frustrated or exhausted participating in the court process. So we check in with them, we understand that that happens, and we adjust along the way so that they are provided what they need and only what they need at that time. But at any time during the court process, we're there to support them. We're the voice behind the phone, we're their liaison through the process. We're a lot easier to get a hold of than the attorneys are during the court process because, as Teresa mentioned, there are a lot of cases that come through our office. So we're their first point of contact. We're the voice that's on the phone when they call.
Thank you so much for that explanation. We're kind of flipping over now to the other side here. So maybe Christy Zander, your probation agent, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you approach this work and what your role in this is.
Sure. So I've been a probation agent for 19 years now. I supervise strictly a sex offender caseload. So that can include somebody who is convicted of a sexual assault like Eric in this scenario was. It could also consider somebody who, if they served a prison sentence and had several violations that were sexual in nature while they were in prison and were assessed to have a sex offender treatment need, they would be supervised on a sex offender caseload. If somebody committed a burglary that was sexually motivated, so they went in to commit the burglary to steal women's underwear because of a sexual fetish, they would be supervised as a sex offender. So we take each case and look at the specifics when we impose rules. There are standard rules that everybody on supervision has, but then we also look at specifics for each case. So I'm going to talk more specific about Eric's case since it is specific to each offender. In Eric's case, he would have a no contact with Sarah based on that she is the victim, and that would be something that I would speak with her about. Since the boyfriend is a friend of Eric's, to see what her input would be as far as any contact, if she would want it or not. In most cases, the victims don't want contact with the offender, and that is fine, and we will enforce that. Because Eric was intoxicated during the offense, he will have what we consider to be a no bar, no drink rule. Even though he is of legal drinking age, he will not be able to consume alcohol or go to a bar while he is on supervision. If in this case, Eric was taking pictures of Sarah while he was having sex with her or he was passed out, we can limit his cell phone use as far as any social media. If he was talking about the offense on there or was posting pictures, we could even limit that, you can have a cell phone, but maybe you can't have a camera on it, and he would have to take steps to make it that his camera couldn't work on the phone. In this case, if he was convicted of 2 registrable offenses, which would be 2 counts of a second-degree sexual assault, he would be considered a special bulletin notice sex offender, or an SBN. In that case, he would be required to not only register with the sex offender registry, he would be on lifetime GPS. The GPS monitors are probably about the size of your computer mouse, maybe a little bit slimmer. They have to wear it on their ankle. Life means life. We have had people that have passed away in supervision, and we've had to get their GPS monitors back. With the GPS, that in real time, I can look and see where Eric would be. There can be a zone drawn around Sarah's house that he can't go there. If he goes there, it automatically issues a warrant. Law enforcement will pick him up, and then he would go into custody for violating that no contact. He would have to have a lot of aspects of his life approved if he wanted to have a future dating relationship. That is something that he would have to have approved by me. I would have to meet the person he wants to be in a relationship. He has to go over the offense with that person, and then I go over with them again to make sure he's telling them the truth. Employment has to be approved, residence has to be approved. These also have to be reported to the registry. He, starting out, would be meeting with me probably every week. There are 6 other agents in my office that also supervise sex offender caseloads, so he could be assigned to one of them as well. He would be assessed for sex offender treatment. Through that assessment, our treatment provider would look at, what were the reasons behind the offense? Why did he commit this? Because in most cases, somebody is not going to want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to have sex with them. So we're going to try and look at what the root of the offense was and to work on getting him treatment so that he doesn't commit another offense. Seems with the registry, while they're on active supervision, he has to report changes to me. I report them to the registry. When they're off supervision, they are completely responsible for reporting those changes. A length of a sentence can vary depending on the conviction. Some depending on the conviction, if it's a misdemeanor, probation usually is only for a year or 2. I have some people on my caseload that they're going on probably year 25 of their supervision. So they get to be really long sentences. And so this is something that isn't going to be a quick and easy over thing for Eric. He would be on supervision for a number of years if he didn't go to prison first. If he went to prison, he would come back out on extended supervision, which his rules would be the same as if he was on probation, just the sentence structure would be different.
Thank you. I got booted, but I'm back. So we are moving to Teresa Schultz, our registry specialist. Maybe we could talk a little bit about what that means in relation to this case.
Sure. So my name is Teresa Schultz, and I am a registry specialist. I am based in Marathon County. However, I do cover Wood, Portage, Clark, and Lincoln counties. So what I'm in charge of is ensuring compliance of registered sex offenders within my counties. We do have about 30 of us within the SORP registry throughout the state, and we do divide all the counties throughout the state amongst us. So there's always somebody covering the county, and then we do have a central office in Madison to field questions as well. I am going to share. See if I can find it. Okay. So currently, as of today, I pulled these numbers. In Wisconsin, we have 25,827,000 registrants. And it's important to note that these are those that are registered. There are, in supervised through probation, registrants or offenders that don't require to register. Might be somebody that breaks into a building, someone's house, steals underwear for a fetish. They might be charged with a burglary, a theft, or those kind of offenses that would not be requiring them to register. On active supervision throughout the state, on probation, we have 6,265 registrants. In prison, there's 5,632, which leaves 13,930 are on no type of supervision. They are only required to answer to the registry. Within Marathon County, we have 505 registered sex offenders throughout the county. So this is a listing of all mandatory registrable offenses. So if a person is convicted of any of these, they are required to register, and it's either going to be 15 years or lifetime. And as Christy said, it would be until they passed away. We verified that they died through obituary, through a death certificate, and then they would be removed from our site. If they are required to register for 15 years, if they are on supervision for anywhere between 1 and 20 some years of supervision, they're going to be required to register for that entire time that they're on supervision, and then their 15 years will not start until they actually discharge. Then we do have a listing of offenses that a judge can go ahead and do discretionary registration. Their conviction didn't mandate it, but the judge thinks it's important that they still be required to register. The judge can go ahead and require them to register for 15 years or life. So like I said, we have the length of registration, which is 15 or plus years, lifetime. And then we do have those that are lifetime and on GPS. And then we also have the ones that are convicted of 2 or more counts or convictions of registrable offenses, which are called SBNs. In Marathon County, SBNs are the ones that are released in media, on the police sites, on social media, and on the newspapers, through social media typically, and on the news. Those ones are only going to be the ones that have 2 or more counts or convictions, and not the others. So what they need to report if they're registered, they have to report their residence, employment, volunteer work, schooling, and internet information, including social media. So they have 10 days if they are just on the registry or on probation to report that information to us from any change. If they're on what's extended supervision, any of these changes, they are mandated by state statute to report those changes to us within 24 hours. Other requirements, besides just reporting the information, they have to have updated photos at least every 2 years. They are subject to random home verification checks, whether it's by local law enforcement or US Marshals. And they also have to provide true and accurate information. The registry is very separate from probation. We have obviously thousands of people on the registry, and we are taking the information. The registry is more like an informational tool versus a supervision. So we are taking the information from these registrants, verifying it the ways that we have the ability to, and then being able to post that on the public site. So if a registrant is not reporting information to us, if they're not following through with their requirements, they go into what's called non-compliance. So they can not respond to the verification letters, they cannot report changes to us, fail to show up for photographs, fail to register if they move to our state, or once they get convicted, they don't meet with us to complete the registration process. We go into investigation status, and we will take all the information of our findings and pass that on to the district attorney's office. And that could be a new felony, which is a maximum of 6 years, which would be 3 years initial incarceration followed by 3 years extended supervision. If they are registered for a misdemeanor offense, like a 4th degree sexual assault, which is a misdemeanor, their non-compliance would only be a misdemeanor as well, with a maximum of 9 months. So a few laws associated with the registration that does not come from the actual state statutes that mandates registration. The first one is about sex offender name changes. They are not allowed to identify or go by other names other than the names that they have provided to the department through aliases, reported internet identifiers, and that is so we can post those on the public site. So if Joe Johnson gives the name of Danny Smith as an alias to somebody, we can have that listed in our website, and you could type in either one of the names and they would come up with the same person. Certain child sex offenders cannot work or volunteer directly with children the age of 16 or under. Now, that does not mean that registered sex offenders cannot work at McDonald's or Walmart, where minors might be employed or they are customers. What this means is that they can't directly babysit, whether it's paid or unpaid. They can't play Santa Claus, Easter Bunny. They can't be Boy Scout leaders, coaches, mentors, youth pastors. So something that would make them directly being with minors as their primary task. And then we have registrants on school premises. So this has changed over the last few years. There are exemptions that registrants actually can be on school grounds. So in Eric's case, let's say he has children and he wants to enroll them in school. He is actually able, under the exemption, to be on school grounds. He would just have to notify the school administrator that he had children in the school district at the time of enrollment and at the beginning of every school year, and then follow whatever school policies that they have in place. Other exemptions is if they're no longer on supervision, they have their civil rights restored, and the school is a voting poll site, they're able to vote and go there. And then the last one is if there is a non-school sponsored event, let's say a comedian comes to town and wants to use the auditorium at the school for a venue, and they want to attend that. So the same thing happens for their exemption. They just have to notify the school administrator or a designee of their registration status, and then they will be able to be there. So all the other 50 states, all of 50 states have their own registry. This is a good website you can go on, and then it gives you some quick facts about those states' registry. You're able to click on them. It'll tell you the requirements and give you a link directly to their state's websites. This is our public registry. You can go on there. You can do a couple different things on there. If you know somebody's name and you're curious, you can go ahead and type it in. You could go ahead and do a search by radius of maybe your work or your home, and they will pull up all the registrants within a certain mile radius of that address, and you can see who is in your proximity. You can go ahead and submit anonymous tips or ask questions anonymously, or you can go ahead and leave contact information that we can respond to you. All registered sex offenders will be on here except for juvenile offenses. Juvenile registered offenses, no matter how old they are, after the offense will never be made public. So in this case, we had talked kind of about Eric and that he possibly would be a second degree sexual assault. He would be a lifetime registrant. If he was convicted of 2 counts and went to prison, he would be released on lifetime GPS as well.
Thank you very much for sharing all this information about the how you approach these. It really is kind of a team effort here to ensure justice is served and the victims are whole again. So I guess now is the time when we're opening it up to questions if people have them. I have a bunch that I can start with that I'm kind of interested in knowing a little bit more about. So maybe I'll just start with you, Kimberly. I'm curious, will you tell if you have somebody talking to, do you tell other people what they say? And also, in order to work with an advocate, do we have to report to law enforcement? You could go over that a little bit.
Those are really great questions. I'm really glad that you brought that up. So one of my favorite parts of my job is that everything that I do with victims is totally confidential. So truly, that is so important for victims to hear, that they have this completely safe person to be able to talk with. And in order for me, I mean, legally and morally and ethically, to share what a victim is sharing with me with somebody else, I need that written release of information. So I am truly a confidential confidant for a victim. I've heard that over and over again, how important that is for victims. So even though I work every day and I work super closely with all of the members of this team, it's really important for victims to know that I'm not sharing everything they say with me with all of the members of this team, right? So that's a really important piece to point out. And definitely, I was talking through this scenario here where Sarah had reported already with Officer Thuman, but absolutely, in order to work with the women's community, there is no requirement to report to law enforcement. There's no requirement that you have to meet us at the SANE exam at the local ER. You can call us on our 24-hour support line, and any point you're at in this process, we are there to be a support for you. So that's definitely important to know, that if someone is considering, I really want to talk to someone about what happened, but I don't want to have to report this. If you are a legal adult, I do not have to report that. You do not have to report that. I am truly a safe person to talk to and be able to process these things. And that's kind of a piece that I brought up before about being different from a licensed mental health therapist, is that it's unofficial. I kind of call myself an unofficial professional in this process. So that means, if a victim is really struggling on a specific day, even if they had just met with their therapist on Monday, but Wednesday is really tough for them, they can text me. And if my schedule is open, I can meet with them. I can talk with them. I can answer questions. I get to be, as much as possible for my schedule, I get to be there for them in the moments that they really need that, in addition to all of the other players in this whole puzzle piece of everything we're putting together. Something else that I wanted to mention too, as far as where you come into contact with advocates at the women's community, there's also no end date. I can work with somebody for as long as they want to talk to me. If that process, if they have not reported to law enforcement and they just want to talk to me right around when this happened, that's as far as our services can go, if that's what they want. But on the other end of that, I have folks I personally have worked with for many years and will continue to work with and keep in touch with and support for as long as they feel that that's necessary. Some of the items that Officer Bedish mentioned that are super important that we're able to provide as well: access to transportation. I've transported folks personally in my car. We can have help with clothing and food item needs. We have a pantry at the women's community. There's never, of course, any cost to access any of the services through the women's community. So all of those things, I mean, truly, when I say a support person, it means anything that's going to help support that person. And those things can be such a wide range of things, depending on, transportation, access to food, clothing. Important to note that we do have an emergency shelter at the women's community. So like I had mentioned in this scenario with Sarah, if that wasn't safe for her to go back home after that SANE exam in this example, we can certainly house her at our emergency shelter if that's something that she needs for her safety. And definitely that piece of being able to be with somebody through this entire process. I know COVID made everything look a little different, but we're able to support folks on Zoom, in person for court hearings, and then after the fact. I know for the other advocates who are with us tonight, you all know this experience of having worked with someone when all of this is overwhelming and everything is happening. And then after a while, maybe you don't hear from someone for a while, but 3 months down the road, they text you to say hello, or they call you to go get coffee and talk. So we are always here as necessary and ongoing support for as long as victims need us.
Thank you. We're getting lots of questions in the chat, so I think I'll just start maybe with the first one. This question is, if anybody has any recommendations for victims who are struggling with work, maybe that involves losing their job or needing support or other work accommodations. Not sure who's the best equipped to answer that one.
Certainly, well, I'll jump in again. I'm not going to talk the entire time, but that's something else that we are able at the women's community to help folks navigate that process. And I know Kristen spoke to this. That's definitely very common after undergoing a traumatic experience, that folks are going to struggle. Or we've had experiences where somebody worked with their abuser, their offender, or they have those traumatic memories attached to work, or just truly the process of dealing with this trauma leaves them unable to work. So we as advocates at the women's community are certainly able to help look at what other resources and options there are. We can help actually also with transitional living issues if someone needs to leave their apartment. For example, I know in our scenario tonight with Sarah, this assault occurred at her boyfriend's, I believe her and her boyfriend's apartment. Say this had been, her place of residence that she can no longer stay at because this traumatic event happened there. We're able to assess and see if she can benefit from our assistance with rent or with helping her find a new apartment. And it's the same thing, certainly with issues of work. We can help get connected to other resources here in town through the job center or whatever programs there may be to help find a better fit for employment or help find the next step for her that's going to be the most beneficial.
So I'll jump in on to kind of piggyback on what Kimberly just said. So we can also, through my unit, I can also assist with victims if they, if it's a direct involvement of their victimization, that they lose their housing or they lose their job because they just can't go to work, or if it's a direct result, we can assist with that financially as well. So if it comes down to it, I know that I've worked with some advocates from the women's community to help kind of tag team paying rent or helping move a victim and helping with those deposits and the first month's rent and things like that. We can assist with that as well. We can also partner with and pay for hotel stays, or transportation for those things, and as again direct them towards resources within the community for employment. I just cannot help if if the loss of employment is not a direct correlation to the victimization. So like if the person was unemployed prior to becoming a victim, I would not be able to help in those cases. But afterwards, if it was a direct correlation, then we can obviously partner and do a lot with that victim. So, and we also, I wanted to mention, we also have, I wouldn't call it a pantry, but we have closets here at the police department that clothing and hygiene supplies, we can also help a victim go shopping as well if needed.
Thank you for that. This next question is talking about racial considerations and disparities, potentially in the criminal justice system. For example, listed here, if the victim is a person of color who is maybe distrustful of law enforcement, is this approach tailored to ensure you can provide services? But also on the flip side, is there a way to evaluate some of the case dispositions and sentencing based on race? It's kind of a lot going on, so
I can talk a little bit about the dispositions and sentences. We actually proposed, the county was working in collaboration with the University of Wisconsin-Madison on what's called the University Project. And one of the proposals that our office put forth was analysis of the criminal justice system in racial and socioeconomic disparities in the system. So that project is underway. So they will be gathering information as to that very topic about any disparities that I'm not sure how they'll go about gathering the data. We don't have a data analyst in our county, unfortunately. And so it very well may be that the result is that they tell us we need to be gathering more sufficient data in certain areas. But we're already in that process. We've already met with the University Project, and we are very happy to have that collaboration so we can look into that very topic of any disparities based on socioeconomic or race. So that's a great question, and I'm glad that we're doing that. So
I'm going to jump in there again. So we do our best here at the police department to make sure that everyone is treated equally. I do know my unit has made it a goal of ours to partner and kind of bridge those gaps with the Hmong culture, because there's a lot of distrust between the Hmong culture and law enforcement. So we're definitely trying to build those partnerships and educate and spread that awareness that we're here. Another thing that we like to do is if an individual presents with a as a victim and they're more comfortable talking to, like a Hispanic female is more comfortable talking to a Hispanic advocate, or a Hmong victim, you know, with a Hmong advocate, an African-American female with an African-American advocate. We'll definitely try to meet those needs and build that trust. So we're doing our best here to make sure that those needs are met.
I'll pop in on that, and definitely thanks for speaking to that, Sarah. We do have a diverse variety of advocates at the women's community, so we're always able, as best we can, to provide that specific support and be cognizant of the cultural diversity. Something else as advocates that I'll say, part of our job, I mean, as an advocate, is to help stand up with and for the person that we're working with. So to the best of our ability, and from a place of being able to connect with these systems and being at a place of privilege to be able to be a voice for the folks that we're working with. That's part of my job as an advocate. I certainly consider that part of my job, to be able to help the person, the victim that I'm working with, the survivor, stand up and help them advocate for themselves in that situation. And if we can right a wrong that's happened within any system, I believe that that's part of our work as well, as an advocate and as everyone on this team.
thank you. This is a question, another one from the audience. At what point in the process does a victim learn about their statutory and constitutional rights? Now, do you talk to them at the time of the trauma where they might not fully understand or remember, or do you go over that a couple of times?
I can jump in here, and I will say that I know that throughout our system, throughout the people that work with victims, lots of training has been done about the new constitutional rights that have come about due to Marsy's Law. One of the things that we do is we do send out a packet of information, and that's so that they have it in their hands. It's something that they can refer back to along the way if they're not ready to look at it at the initial time. They have it in writing, they have contact information, they have their rights information right there for them to read and go through when they're ready to do that. But again, it's important that everyone in the system is trained and is aware of victims' rights, so that if they're working with an advocate and they say, you know, I haven't heard anything about the court process, I don't know what my right is to know about what's happening, the advocate can then tell them that, you know, they do have rights, that they can find that information out and get them in touch with myself or any member of the victim witness program along the way.
Thank you for that. This is a good question. Are you doing any presentations for people in high school?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself fast enough. Yes, that's actually a part of my job. I am a prevention educator for the women's community, and it's actually one of my very favorite parts of my job. We are in a lot of schools in Marathon County. We have a regular and really solidified relationship with the Wausau School District, and we are in both Wausau East and Wausau West each semester. We have almost a full week-long curriculum at this point that does speak to all of these issues. We address healthy relationships and what does that actually look like? What is the root issues with domestic violence? What is consent? Such an important topic. We talk about sexual assault. We talk about social media safety, and we start to talk about human trafficking and some of the myths and realities around human trafficking. And actually almost everybody who's on this panel tonight has come into the high schools with us and been able to present almost this same panel, right, just to high school students. So we're incredibly grateful for this team and the relationships we have within the county to be able to teach this to high schools. We're typically in freshman or sophomore health classes, and we get an amazing response. I will say I look at each evaluation we get personally as I go through those, and so many students have said that they're so grateful for this, that this isn't something they encountered somewhere else. So yes, super critical that we talk about this, and I'm so grateful for the folks on this panel that take time out of their days to be able to come and do this panel for high school students. It is very necessary and eye-opening, and we absolutely love to present, I will say, I love to present this information to the high schools. And definitely if there's a school that you're not sure if we're in or not, we are always interested in branching out. So certainly reach out to us if you have any questions about if we're in your school or if you'd like to bring us to your school.
Awesome. And I know you just launched a new program called Spark to help kind of teens advocate for each other. Maybe you could just touch on that just a quick bit.
Sure, thank you. That's my, I'm super excited about Spark. So Spark is Students Preventing Violence and Reclaiming Community. And we're incredibly grateful to be able to have this opportunity to actually compensate youth for their work in our program as advocates at a peer level. I will say a lot of the evaluations that I look at from our high school curriculum teaching is students saying that this might land differently from a fellow student. So I certainly know I am not a teenager. Surprisingly, I'm a little bit older than that. And I know it's going to hit differently. It's going to sound different to a 15-year-old, me standing up and talking about this versus them hearing something from a fellow classmate. So we're really grateful that through the Danny's Journey Education Fund and the Volkman family, who ended up tragically losing their daughter Danny when she was in high school due to unhealthy coping mechanisms she turned to because of an abusive relationship, they do a fundraiser every year in Danny's honor, and they're able to help us provide that compensation for teens to be involved in Spark. So Spark is super new, but we have our first group up and running, and I'm very excited to be able to have student representatives in the schools to be able to start to act as resources to speak to their fellow students and to, in the future, do some speaking engagements, maybe much like this.
Thank you. Here's a question. It says, how do you talk to victims throughout the legal process? You take steps to provide victims with the opportunity to confer with the assistant district attorneys assigned to the case. How do you take into account the victim's input on charging decisions and plea offers and plea agreements?
And I can take the first part of that. So again, in the packet that we send out to victims, we ask them how they want to be involved. We ask them what information that they want. Do they want notices of hearings? Do they want to confer with the DA's office? Do they want to know what the outcome of the case is? They send that back to us, and we note those requests in our system. So then when hearings come up, we send out letters. We also ask them if they are interested in attending to let us know that they plan on attending a hearing. We will then talk to them about what's going to happen at the hearing, discuss with them what they may hear, if there's going to be testimony, that sort of thing before the hearing to help them decide if it's something that they want to participate in. If they ask to confer with our office, what will happen is the attorney at the appropriate time, if they're starting to have negotiations and think about resolving the case, they will let their victim witness specialist know. There are 3 specialists in the office, and we all are assigned attorneys. And so we work with specific attorneys. So each attorney will reach out to their specialist, and that person then reaches out to the victim, makes contact with them to let them know that there's some discussions going on and to get their input. The attorney may have an idea of what they're thinking a resolution to the case might look like. And we would have that discussion with the victim, tell them what the attorney has provided us as far as what they're thinking about the resolution, and see what's important to that victim. Ask them how they feel about what's being presented. Then let the attorney know if they have any feelings, any additions, anything that they would like to see that they hadn't thought of as part of the potential offer that we went over. So we bring that back to the attorney, let them know what the victim's input is. Sometimes there's victims that want to have more of a discussion with the attorney about why they're proposing the resolution that they may be proposing. And we will set up meetings so that the victims can sit down, meet with the attorneys, talk through really, what's important, what their thoughts are about the case, and have that discussion. So we will definitely set up a time for them to meet and talk with the attorney if that's something that the victim is interested in doing. And I think I'll let Teresa talk a little bit about the plea agreements and what goes into that.
Thank you, Pam. I would say that it is a very difficult conversation oftentimes with victims to try to make sense of the criminal justice system as it relates to the word justice is in there. And many times victims struggle with what the limitations are of the criminal justice system. And we, as Pam said, I hope and I think we do a good job of listening to victims and trying, if possible, to incorporate what is important to the victim. Many times victims will say that sex offender registration, for example, is really important, or maybe some conditions of supervision are really important, or restitution or counseling. In the future, they can't afford counseling. It's limiting their access to counseling. These are things that we wouldn't know except for talking with the victim and getting that input. So we really value that input from victims. And we don't ever want, because it's not the case, we don't ever want victims to feel that the weight of the decisions of the case, that they're theirs, because those decisions are the prosecutor's decisions. And so we value the input, we take the input very seriously, but ultimately the responsibility will be on us as prosecutors to determine what a plea offer will be, because we wouldn't want a victim to feel that kind of pressure, and it's our responsibility and we're accountable for those offers. So Pam does a great job of, I call Pam pleasantly tenacious. She will track me down or any other attorney down, as will her staff, to get answers for victims, and will not stop until she does. So that is an opportunity that's available and will be provided for victims.
Thank you for that. I have a question for Officer Thuman. So what happens if people were maybe using illegal drugs or consuming alcohol before the incident? Will the police officers believe the victim, or will they get in trouble?
Yeah, that's a common question we have. Alcohol might play a factor in what had happened or was present during that incident. At the end of the day, that's going to be pretty minor on the scale of things. I'm going to be more concerned about hearing that victim, listening to it, in this case, Sarah. For example, let's say Sarah was underage, maybe she was 20 years old, and she had been consuming alcohol. She might be concerned about reporting it just all together, but it's going to be very minor. I'm not going to, address that. I'm going to listen to her and hear what she has to say, because that's more important to me.
Thank you. And maybe kind of related, just curious, the sexual assault was several years ago. How long is too late to report it?
Yeah, and Teresa had mentioned some statute of limitations that are involved at that step. But from this standpoint, honestly, it doesn't matter. Reporting that incident, might be beneficial for that victim just to get it off their chest. Maybe it's something they've been holding in for a while and just now finally want to talk about it. And maybe that might lead to whoever the perpetrator was, might lead to solving a different case or preventing someone else from being victimized. And then from there, I can direct them to services at the women's community with Sarah at the Victim Resource Unit. So I don't think it's ever a bad idea to report it, no matter how long ago it was, because then you can take advantage of the resources we have available, and you can get the help you need.
Thank you. I have some questions for Lynette. Maybe you could help us understand how long after an assault can victims still come in for an exam, and do they have to make an appointment, or can they just show up in the ER?
Sure. So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Officer Thurman said. They can come in anytime. Obviously, the sooner they come in, the likelihood of us to obtain DNA or any kind of evidence is better. So definitely come in anytime. Just think sooner better. They do not have to make an appointment. They can just come to the emergency room. It may be best for, and we would recommend that they just call our emergency department for several reasons. If the emergency room is really busy and they have to call one of us in, it would just save the victim some time. But pretty much we're available 24/7. So.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of follow-up questions on this one because it's kind of a big deal. So if somebody comes in, do they have to report it to law enforcement, or can they just get that medical care? Will you report it to law enforcement?
Right. So similar, they can see law enforcement and not see us in the medical field, or they can see us in the medical field and not report it. It's completely up to Sarah in this case, what she wants to do. So, and then we, even if they decide, no, I do not want to report to law enforcement, that's fine. We're still going to send it to we'll collect evidence if they will allow us, and we'll send it to the crime lab, and they have up to like 19 years or 18 years to decide whether or not they're going to report for sure.
Thank you. So if maybe somebody's on their parents' health insurance and they're concerned about maybe talking about it right away, how much does that exam cost, and do they have to pay for it, or how does that work?
So similar to other services that SART kind of supports, there is a Wisconsin grant that covers all costs, so they will not see a bill for our exam at all. And that's something important for them to see. I've taken care of and done exams where patients were very concerned about how much things were going to cost, because we're giving medications, we're drawing blood, we're taking, pictures. They see this kit that can look really intimidating, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that if it's going to cost me anymore. So even just letting them know this isn't going to cost you anything. It's just one thing that we can do to take off a stressor of this traumatic experience.
Thank you. I feel like I know, Officer Bedish, what your answer is going to be to this question. Let's say a victim chooses not to seek any support services from the Victim Resource Unit. What happens if they change their mind later and they decide they do want your help?
Lucky for them, we're always here. So it doesn't matter. They can talk to me whenever they want. In fact, I just spoke with a female who was assaulted months ago, and she's just ready to report. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in our jurisdiction, so I had to refer her to a different jurisdiction, but she's ready to talk, and here we are. So, and even with that, even though the assault did not occur in our jurisdiction, and the victim doesn't even live in this jurisdiction, we are still able to help her and connect her with resources. So we are here. I'm here whenever they are ready, even if, and this has happened too, where victim is reported, they reported to law enforcement, the report has been done. I might talk to them one day, and then they might say, I'm done, I don't want help, I don't want to do this anymore. And then the next week or 2 weeks, they decide they want help again. So that's fine. We're always here. No judgment. We understand that the struggle, and we're always here. We're always here to help. So.
And I just want to chime in that we have successfully prosecuted cases that have been decades old, that the victim has come forth later in life, maybe they were sexually assaulted as a child or as an adult, and they've come forth later. And I just want to emphasize, this is also a myth that, well, I don't have any evidence. Evidence is the statement of the victim. And law enforcement does a wonderful job. One of those successful prosecutions was from the Wausau Police Department at their investigation, and they look to corroborating statements of friends that they may have told or circumstances that were going on at the time, and we can piece together a case. So anytime a victim comes forward, it is never true that there's no evidence. There is evidence in that victim's statement. So I just wanted to piggyback off of what Sarah said, because it is really important for all the reasons that Officer Thuman said as well, if a victim wants to come forward to do that.
Thank you for that. I have a question, a couple of them for mental health therapist Kristen Seidler. How do people know if they need therapy? And also, I know you're employed through the Wausau Police Department. Does it cost anything for folks to use your services?
So my services are free. They do not cost any money. I'm employed through a VOCA grant, so that's a Victims of Crime Act grant. And so there are no charges to that. So I don't go to insurance companies or anything like that. And then usually what I tell people is, I mean, it's always great to have an objective person to talk to. So especially if something really awful has happened, I always think it's better to err on the side of caution. But especially if you are having a really hard time sleeping, if you are feeling on edge a lot, you've noticed that maybe it's basically changing like your lifestyle, or it's negatively impacting different areas of your life. So if it's hard to get up and go to work, or you just can't focus at work because you're thinking about all these things, you're not able to do your job as well as you used to. Maybe you're withdrawing from people, kind of isolating, not doing things that you used to enjoy because of it, or you're avoiding things because of it, because it reminds you of what happened. And you're just not really feeling safe. Those would all be really great, I guess, well, not great symptoms, but those would all be reasons that it might be good to come and talk with somebody to see how we can get you feeling better and more like yourself.
Thank you so much. I have a question maybe for everybody, but also kind of related to this. What steps can our community take to continue addressing that stigma of sexual assault and victim blaming?
Well, I think we're doing that right now. I think the more we can talk about it, I mean, we're already in the schools. I mean, I have 2 teenagers. They get so sick of hearing me talk. I think, having these panels and continuing to partner with community groups is just one way that we're already doing it.
Well, and I think too, there's the whole Start by Believing campaign that I know the women's community has been really awesome about spreading around. I think just believing people or not looking for reasons not to believe them, really. I know in some of the high school panels, Teresa has said this before, and I've kind of stolen it from her, so sorry, Teresa. But I think a lot of the times the reason that people do that and try to make excuses and victim blame is because they think if they can come up with some of those reasons, that means like that it could never happen to them. And I think it's a way for people to feel like, to give them a sense of safety. When really it could happen to anybody. And so I think just kind of accepting that, and that it isn't just one thing that somebody could do. And we never know how we're going to react to a situation until we're in it. And a lot of that has to do with our brains too, which I'm not going to get into all the logistics of that. But some of that's like just unconscious and beyond our control. And a lot of times we don't really think about it that way and just think, well, because they did this or that must mean that they were somehow complicit. And that just is not the case. So I think just taking people for where they're at and believing them.
So I'm going to piggyback off of what Kristen said, and that I think that the biggest thing we can do is accept that sexual assaults aren't always aren't always how they're perceived in movies or what you see in Hollywood. So a lot of the sexual assaults that we see involve situations like this, where the victim knew the offender and it wasn't overtly violent in nature. It wasn't a stranger in an alleyway, and there wasn't a large amount of bodily injury. It wasn't like a violent rape as perceived in movies. So we have found that victims are hesitant to disclose because it doesn't meet that criteria. So then obviously it can't be sexual assault. We've also heard from witnesses that say, well, it didn't look like this, so it couldn't have been sexual assault. Or it didn't sound like this, so it couldn't have been a sexual assault. So the biggest, I think, from like our perspective, or at least from my perspective in talking to victims, is you need to hear what they're saying, and that just because it doesn't fit what your idea of sexual assault is doesn't mean that it wasn't a sexual assault and that victim wasn't hurt.
I'm going to pop on as well and continue the theme that everyone's been saying. And like Jessica had mentioned, to open this event tonight, that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we're trying to have these conversations, of course, throughout April, but year round. And we know that sexual violence, domestic violence, violence thrives in silence. So the more that we talk about this, the more that folks understand they're not alone if they've had this experience. Just like everyone just said, I'll echo, to start by believing someone when they disclose this to you, to start by having more conversations so people feel comfortable saying, actually, I had that experience too. And from my piece of, we talked about being in the high schools. I know this wasn't exactly the question, but my silver lining in my heart of this work is thinking about preventing this in the future. And that is where truly teaching what consent actually is so critical at that high school level, at the middle school level. So we can actually prevent sexual violence in the future from understanding what consent actually means. So yes, talking more, asking questions, getting folks involved. This is all that we can all keep doing April and year round to be able to erase the stigma and believe survivors.
Thank you for that. There is a question in here. I know we had a lot of media attention a few years ago about the Department of Justice sexual assault kit tracking database. Maybe you could sound off a little bit on how you think that's going, how progress has been made there.
I know that we haven't had a lot of cases come forward yet as a result of the initiative, but I do know that other counties have. So in my opinion, if that initiative brings forth one case that wouldn't have, that makes it worthwhile. I guess I don't know if any of the advocates have anything to add, or Lynette, if you have anything to add, but I do think that that's a worthwhile initiative.
I would echo that. We had in a different county, one of our SANEs was just called to testify from a kit on that law, and they got a conviction. So absolutely, we support it.
Thank you. Here's a question for folks. If there are any recommendations for friends or family members to provide support if somebody discloses a sexual assault to them, whether they want to report that or not.
Honestly, the best thing that friends or family can do is just believe them. Just hear them out. Just listen to what they have to say. Obviously, the cop side of me says encourage them to report, but that's up to them. And the biggest, and I know this has been said many times tonight, but that victim lost the control was taken away from that victim when they were assaulted. And the one thing that, aside from listening to a victim, the one other important thing that friends and family can do is give that victim the control back and let them know that it's their decision if they want to report or not. It's completely up to them. And that's, that's the respect you can show them, but just listen to them, listen to what they have to say. And then, unfortunately, even if family or friends reports it to law enforcement on the victim's behalf, we would have to hear from the victim. So as coming from a good place as that may be, it might not be very beneficial to that victim, because we then would have to talk to the victim too to get their side of the story. And the victim may not want that. So just listen to what their needs are at that point.
That first interaction, that first couple of moments where a victim has summoned up the courage or strength to talk to somebody about it, the visible reaction of that friend or family member, and it's not even the words necessarily that are spoken, but the reaction, if the reaction is one of compassion and understanding and support, that person's going to keep talking. If there's a look of shock or horror, or they don't want to, clearly the person doesn't want to hear it, or they start badgering the person with questions like, why would you do that? Or what do you mean this? Or what, instead of just listening and visibly showing compassion and support, I think that's just critical to that person starting that journey to disclosing, because people, just like you sense when you tell anybody anything, it's no different. You sense whether they're ready to receive that information, if they're supportive of receiving that information. And then I'll think about it as a sexual assault and how difficult that is to talk about. We have difficulty talking about it in society. Even if you're good friends with that person, they're going to feel that. So that would be my my 2 cents on that. Just if you sense someone's trying to tell you something important, think about how you're responding, because it might shut that person down if you're not sensitive.
And I'll just echo off of what everybody else said. I mean, I think listening and supporting them is the biggest thing. A lot of times people just want to feel validated in how they feel, and they don't even necessarily need or want your opinion or your advice on things. They just want to be heard, and they want their feelings validated. And a lot of times if you can just do that and just be there for them, they might eventually decide that they do want to report it. I think all of us on this panel, obviously, like, our whole gut reaction is like, yes, please report. And yet the reality is that there are cons to that. People do have, lose things at sometimes, that is the reality of it. And so if they're not ready to do that, making sure that you let them know that that's okay, and just being there for them. And sometimes what I do with people too, who don't necessarily know if they want to report, because there's a lot of confusion that goes in with that, because like I said, there are lots of pros and cons for the person personally, is I sometimes encourage them, well, even if you aren't sure right now, document, everything that you feel comfortable doing. And then that way, if you decide that you want to do it later, at least you have some of that stuff. So I don't know if other people on the panel would agree with that, but I just tell them that, because then too, it can just maybe help ease their mind a little bit, where then they feel a little better if later on they decide that they do want to. And again, that can sometimes give them a sense of control as well, where okay, well, I'll just do this, and then I'll decide later, and it can help them throughout the process. So
I have to agree with everything that was said. And I want to also mention, so this question asks about family members of victims. That is legitimate, that a family member may be a secondary victim in this situation. And it's valid for you to be struggling with your own feelings of how to deal with this, how to understand, and how to support that person. And I definitely want to stress that the women's community is a resource for those folks as well. You can absolutely call and get support around, gee, how do I process this myself and be a good support for this victim? And kind of along those lines, I just also want to mention that most commonly when we're talking about sexual assault scenarios, we're talking about female identified victims, but every single person on this panel tonight knows that sexual assault happens regardless of gender identity. And we are all here to support everyone in the situation that this happens. Even the women's community, right? We serve everybody who needs our help. So regardless of gender identity, age, or sexual orientation. And even though the most commonly talked about ways we tend to talk about female identified victims, we see, we can only understand statistics based on what's reported, but we know that there's such a huge stigma attached to reporting sexual assault. When you are male identified, right? You're a man, or certainly if you're non-binary and you're in the LGBTQ community. So we are all here to support everybody who deals with these situations.
Thank you. I have a couple of other questions. I think this one will go to Teresa Schultz, talking about the registry. Now, if somebody is registered, can they be on social media? Is that allowed?
Actually, yes. So in the Wisconsin state statutes, it does allow registrants to be on social media or internet in general. They just need to report the internet identifier and what its site is associated with. So they can be on Facebook, they could be on dating sites, they could have their own Amazon account, online banking. We live in an electronic world. I mean, it's hard pressed to find anything that doesn't have an account associated with it. If they're just online looking at newspapers or looking at things, researching on Google, and they don't have to register for that, that's not something they need to report. But everything else needs to be reported within the 24 hours or 10-day period.
Thank you. Here are a couple of questions about legal representation. There's a question, are there options for victims to get their own attorney? And there's some questions about if there are referrals to maybe those statewide crime victims rights projects staffed by Judicare and Legal Action Wisconsin. I'm not sure who's most well equipped to answer that one.
I tried to answer some of those questions in the
Oh, cool.
chat too, so hopefully you're all seeing some of those. If there's further questions on that, please let us know, but I am trying to answer a few of those because I know we're running a little bit out of time.
Cool. Okay, well, I have a list of questions. Do you want me to continue, or do you want to wrap up?
I think we will wrap up soon. If there is a quick, maybe for one or two more questions, if attendees have any last minute questions, that'd be great. And then Mayor Rosenberg, if you have just a one or two more questions that you would like to ask, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. I guess my question is about, we talked about people who, if a victim talks to you about their assault, and, I'm married to a teacher and he's a mandatory reporter, and I'm curious if there are things that if people want to disclose what's happened to them, if they're not ready maybe to take it public, what they should worry about in that case, if you're a student.
So if you're under 18, from my perspective, if you come in, we're automatically reporting it to Child Protective Services. We don't have, because of reproductive rights and reproductive laws, they have more of a say on what they can have done to them, like as far as they don't want the STI medications, or they do, we can do some of that type of care without parental consent. But really, when you're a minor, we're calling CPS.
Unfortunately, if it's a minor and it comes anywhere near law enforcement, we have to act on it. That's just kind of falls in the realm of the mandatory reporter.
And I'm a mandatory reporter as well. And what I do with minors who are in sessions with me is I always let them know that I'm a mandatory reporter and what that means. And so what if they disclose something like that to me, that means I have to report that. And sometimes in sessions, if I can tell that it might be getting to that point, I try and remind them of that just in case they really don't want to. That doesn't always work out. I mean, sometimes it kind of comes out of nowhere. And then if that happens, or if they decide that they do want to tell me, we have to talk about, okay, I have to tell somebody, and kind of walking through that. And that has happened to me a few times while I've been in this position. And then I've gone with, I've gone to the school resource officer when someone reported to me at school, or I called another officer or another detective actually on another case because he was working the case with my victim, and then they disclosed something else. So I just called him and reported that to let him know that there was this other disclosure. And so far, I think the biggest thing is, as long as you are very like empathetic to them and respectful of their wishes and let them know about that stuff. I so far, knock on wood, have not had any negative experiences with that with any of my juvenile clients. So
I have found that honesty, you just gotta be real with them and they respect that. Don't try and pull a fast one over on them. They're gonna see right through you.
I'll pop on and share that I think of everyone on the panel, I am slightly different in that as an advocate, I am not a mandated reporter, but I am certainly going to follow those guidelines, right? Because my concern is obviously that there is not abusive situations happening. So in my work with youth, which I work with youth a lot, I'm not that mandatory reporter. So that almost feels like I have some flexibility there. And I'm having, especially obviously with teenagers and especially older teenagers, we're having these conversations, just like Kristen said, they know the situation. They're going to know from the outset what I do need to report and what I don't. Because even though I'm not a mandatory reporter, again, my concern is that there's not abuse happening. So I'm definitely going to follow those, guidelines for mandatory reporters. But I have a little bit of that leeway in talking with teens. But just like Kristen said, to be upfront that here's what we need, here's what you need to know in talking with us. And the ultimate is it's for your best interest, for your concern. We're concerned for your safety and your well-being.
I can see that it is 8:30, so I guess I'll turn it back over to Jessica. Thank you so much to all our panel members. This has been really illuminating and helpful to understand. I'm sorry we have to have this conversation, but I'm really glad we had it. It's really important information. So thank you so much for all the work you do, and thanks for sharing your expertise.
So some really great questions tonight. I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us and for asking such wonderful questions. I hope that we were able to answer the majority of them. I know that there's a few possibly in the chat that we weren't able to. If we did not answer your question, please feel free to reach out to us and we can take some more time to have a conversation over the phone, or we can set up a Zoom meeting, or you can come in person. We are here for you and we are here to answer your questions. So again, we just want to take some time to thank you for joining us, and a lot of good questions about how to start this conversation in our community. And by you all coming tonight, that is a great start. Please continue to come to these types of events where you can become educated, comfortable in having these conversations, because they are tough conversations to have. But I think it's important to start early, start young, start with your kids by teaching them simple things about consent if you have a child or a youth in your life. And then also just really being an ally, I think is so important. So always thinking about who can you partner with in the community and who are the experts on this issue. And these folks are the experts in our community, and they are here for you to help answer questions, to help navigate things, or to help start conversations. That's what we do. So our sexual assault response team, as you can see, is amazing. I have the great honor of working with all of these folks. They're very dedicated as to what they do. And you can see it takes a lot of people to respond to sexual assault in our community, and we could not do this work without one another. So we really rely on each other to collaborate and to respond to victims and to hold offenders accountable. And in Marathon County, it's very important that we are holding offenders accountable. And so we have a great protocol through our sexual assault response team and a great system that is working well to address many things. So we as a team also talk about consent, and we talk about how can we get that message out to our community, what can we be doing. And so the panel that we offer in the high schools is one way to start that. Events like tonight is also another way, but we also ask those same very questions in our meetings every month. What could we be doing better and how can we improve things? So lots of work to be done yet. We are really excited that we were able to have this opportunity, especially with our special guest, Mayor Katie Rosenberg. Thank you so much for moderating our panel, for all of the great questions that you came to the table with, and for your willingness to want to be a part of our event and learn more about the good work that's happening here in our community. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight.